Thank you again for attending. So my name is Tracy Gossage, and I will be your program host this evening. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, I wanted to give a big thank you to the many libraries that work together to make this event happen. This program was co-sponsored by 30 area libraries in order to bring this movie and conversation to you. Tonight's program was also organized with the help of RAIN, Racial Awareness in the North Shore, and TIBA, the Together is a Better Alliance. Both of these multiracial groups promote education and activism on racial justice. You can connect with them by visiting their websites to learn more about future events and opportunities to become involved yourself. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers for this evening. So we have the film's producer and our moderator, Nick Kelso, and then the director, Francis Causey. And so I'm just gonna let you go ahead and take it over, Nick.
Thanks so much, Tracy. Such a huge thank you to you, Tracy, for being really pivotal in this happening. So big thanks to Tracy at Northbrook Library. And as Tracy mentioned, I have to give another thank you to Bruce Bondi at RAIN, Racial Awareness on the North Side, a great group to connect with if you want to take this conversation further. And of course, our dear friends of the film and of Francis and I, the Together is Better Alliance. And we'll share a link to them in the chat later. As Tracy mentioned, I'm Nick Kelso, one of the producers at Francis Causey Films, and I'm just so thrilled to be here for this event. And we were just talking before this, this is like a bigger than any red carpet premiere for us. This is really where the rubber meets the road of a documentary like ours, having a real grassroots effort behind it, getting a conversation started, furthering a dialogue that is happening in communities. So we're honored to be here, and such a huge thanks to the 30 Illinois libraries who came together to make this happen. If you haven't watched the film yet, I'll share a quick backstory and also share the link to watch. So The Long Shadow follows former CNN senior producer, TED contributor, and Emmy Award-winning director Francis Causey and producer Sally Holst as they trace back their family's legacy of white privilege, placing it in the context of the history of anti-Black racism in the United States that began with slavery and continues to impact our society today. The film has reached almost 90% of the country on PBS. We actually just aired in the Washington, D.C. market last night, which was really exciting. We've partnered with dozens of organizations from large corporations like Target to Toyota, as well as just dozens and dozens of incredible nonprofits, faith-based groups, libraries, educational institutions, everyone who is committed to furthering this dialogue and action, working to dismantle white supremacy. The film is also streaming on Canopy and Amazon Prime and available on DVD and as the form of an educational toolkit on our website, thelongshadowfilm.com. But you can watch the film, and I'll drop the link in the chat right now, through Friday if you haven't watched it yet, or after this if you want to share it with someone, right on our link here on our website. So I just dropped the link in the chat. The film, it says Sunday. That should say Friday. I'll drop it again. Sorry about that. But please do, after this, share the film with someone who maybe might need to watch as well. Tracy already did a great job of going over the ground rules for Zoom. Please, what we'll add to that is that don't hold back on any question that you think might be difficult. That's why we're here. That's why this space exists. That's one of the reasons the film was created. So please feel free, and probably others in the room are thinking about it too. And with that, I have the great pleasure of introducing director Francis Causey, who is a former CNN senior producer, TED Fellow, Emmy Award-winning documentary filmmaker and journalist, and director of many projects, including, of course, The Long Shadow and Is Your Story Making You Sick, as well as the New York Times critics pick Heist: Who Stole the American Dream. So welcome, Francis.
Thanks, Nick, and Tracy and Sharon and Bruce and all of the libraries that made tonight possible. This is a night we've been looking forward to for a long time, and so let's get right to it. And your questions are the star of the day. So let's talk about your questions.
So Frances, right off, we have a couple of questions that are quite similar from Judith and Mary asking, since both sides of your family were enslavers, have you done research on the people they enslaved? Have you discovered any of their descendants? Have you met with the descendants of the formerly enslaved within your family?
Great question. I was just minding my own business one day, and my editor, Maureen Gosling, and co-creator on the movie, texted me a woman who is president of a technological university, was talking about her family being at Cuckoo, which is my family's home place in Virginia. The shot of me sitting on the steps is a place called Cuckoo in Virginia. And the woman did not want, I reached out to her. She didn't, specifically because she didn't know much about her family. And her family had been enslaved by mine. And I wanted her to know that Cuckoo existed, and that chances are her ancestors were buried there. She chose to remain anonymous, which I totally respect. But we're watching Henry Louis Gates. She was on his show, Finding Your Roots, and he had located her enslaved ancestors there. And so I've been so busy with the film. It's been very difficult to find a lot of the folks that, as my cousins say, and I had to correct her. There were a lot of people that after the revolution, or excuse me, after the Civil War, they quote unquote chose to stay at Cuckoo. We know that they didn't have any other choice. It was either starvation or choose possibly to stay. And that was the decision they made. So it's a great question, but I have made contact with one family. And so I hope one day she'll go to Cuckoo and I can go and meet her. That would be a dream come true.
And Frances, we have a question from Van Gilmer, and I just want to remind everyone to please add your questions there. Just click that Q&A box, and we're welcoming all of your questions. Van asks, what was the city of Greensboro like after the sit-ins there in 1960 to 63 that led you to decide to take action to produce The Long Shadow? And I think maybe that's a good question of talking about what did lead you to create this film.
Right. Good question, Van. So I was born in 63, but I had heard stories. My grandfather was captain of the North Carolina Highway Patrol, and I had heard stories about the sit-in. In fact, my grandfather was, this is not in the film, but my grandfather was in charge that day, and according to the family lore, and I hope it's true, he's gone now, so I can't ask him to corroborate, but allegedly he let the four sit at the lunch counter. I'd like to think that that's really true. But what came after that was, a legacy in the South. It was present in Greensboro, certainly of my childhood, and then later when I moved to Tennessee, a legacy of the voting bloc, the solid voting bloc of the racist South. One of the things that it's I hope apparent in the movie, is that the South really organized around this issue of white supremacy, not white privilege, white supremacy in the form of the Dixiecrats. And they leveraged that power that we talk about. And primarily, in many, many ways that they leverage it. But one of the things I hope comes across in the film is in the three-legged stool of the American dream, right? Education, housing, and employment. The South really put that political power to work and as I talk about, for instance, in the movie, denied Social Security to African Americans for the two primary Black vocations of the era, sharecropping and domestic service. And this is a key component of the American dream. And so that was present in Greensboro. It was present all over the South and the entire country, right? So let's not let the entire country off the hook. I mean, basically the South went to FDR. I mean, the country's sinking at this point, and FDR, they go, the NAACP and the politicians supporting the NAACP at the time go to FDR and say, you've got to outlaw this lynching bill. And the South said, if you do that, FDR, we will not vote to support your New Deal. We couldn't even, when I say we, the South and the country could not even agree in 1938 to outlaw lynching. And so I think that, we had legalized discrimination against African Americans up until 1964. And to think that we would have dealt with centuries of institutionalized, enforced, engineered, deliberate anti-Black racism, that we would overcome it in 5 or 6 generations. Fast forward to today, we really need to be honest about that. And we need to roll up our sleeves like Tiba is doing, like your group is doing. We were with a group of women, business women last night. And let's roll up our sleeves and let's make things just for all Americans, and specifically target the African American community with reparations and things like that. And there are many, many things that we can talk about tonight that we can all do.
Frances, can you talk a bit more about reparations and the history of them existing in our country and what we could do? We had a couple of folks ask, do you believe reparations are an appropriate response to our nation's past? And what about reparations would be most meaningful?
Right. So I hope Nick will share with you my resource list and all the books I read. Probably first among them was a book about capitalism and slavery, and how the enslaved, the American economy was built on the backs of the enslaved, right? And so if it seems pretty intuitive to me that if up for several hundred years, if you've marginalized, you've legally discriminated against African Americans up until 1964, there have been, that's the whole point of my movie, right? There have been it's almost an economic Armageddon. I mean, in my childhood of the South of my childhood, it was apartheid. As I later learned about apartheid in South Africa, we had our own version of economic apartheid. And so if you look very closely and you study what's happened in the African American community as a result of our policies, you see that for every $1 an African American has, a white person has $10. That's median wealth. That is a result of deliberate policy. This is not just something out in the ether that kind of happened. This was deliberately done, right? And so you see most of the problems in the African American community today can be directly connected to poverty. And so there's a bill out there, HR 40, which has been in committee a long time. For some reason, and I know why, reparations has been a word that has been marginalized, scandalized, and because of racism itself, right? But we already did this. We did this with Japanese Americans after World War II, after we so wrongfully interned them. We gave close to $30,000 to each Japanese American family. And so we still see economic marginalization, for instance, in the form of PPP. for very good reason, African Americans, for the most part, don't have great relationships with mainstream banks. They've been targeted for high interest loans, and they, we need to put money into the hands of Black businesses, capital into the hands of Black businesses. And so, that was the desire, that was the goal of was to help small business. Well, as we discovered on the second round, it wasn't getting into the hands because it was being distributed by mainstream banks, right? And so I think they learned, the Biden administration learned from the first distribution, and some of that is changing. But here's another main theme of the movie. After Reconstruction, I document the backlash against African Americans who were taking their newfound freedom seriously. They were getting politically involved. They were doing better economically. And you see this white pushback against the advancement of African Americans. You see it after the civil rights movement in the 60s, and you're seeing it now, right? And so we cannot let, I pray things are different this time, and there's some indications, I hope that it's different. But it's really going to take one viewer at a time, one person at a time. We'll preach to the crowd because we want anybody to see our movies. And as Sharon at TIBA, who has a few reformed racists amongst her group at TIBA, we really need to get this information to people who are skeptical. And quite honestly, if they're skeptical, they haven't been exposed. They're walking kind of around unconsciously in their society, unaware of their privilege. And really, of course, what we're talking about too, in many ways, is the American people are not educated. They're not educated about this history. And so I saw a question in the chat about Tulsa. I really wanted to include Tulsa, which was a terrible race riot where hundreds of African Americans were killed in 1919, I believe. It's just a terrible, it's awful. Unfortunately, there are many, many stories like that, not as bad as Tulsa, but I really wanted to, show the entire history, the over 400 years of the history in one 75-minute sitting. So everybody from my generation, the Southerners I grew up with that thought slavery was benevolent, and it was all these things, these myths that I grew up with, which, by the way, I addressed in my TED Talk a lot more personally about those myths that I grew up with. But we've got to educate people and continue to really force change. And we're better off than we were a year ago. And unfortunately, it took Mr. Floyd's death and Ms. Taylor's death. And so let's not let them die in vain. Let's, as white allies of the Black-led movement, continue to support revealing our true history. And we can't move forward unless we come to grips with our history. That was a very long-winded answer, Nick. Sorry.
No, you're good. Absolutely. And you're touching on a lot of things people are bringing up. So thank you, everyone, for your questions. They've been great questions. This was interesting, Francis, and you were touching on sort of when you're speaking on reparations, the economic impact, obviously. So this question is, okay, the film brings up the fear that white people have of losing their privilege. Has anyone done research on how white people would actually gain from equity for all, financially, lower taxes, property taxes, lower health insurance costs, healthy meals? This patron is thinking that might get people thinking as equity being a gain for all rather than a loss for some.
It's a great question and comment, and I end the film with that. What are we so afraid of, right? So a rising tide should lift all boats, right? So think about it. think about if we make a conscientious effort to get capital in the hands of African Americans, do retraining, training, we use that human ability and possibility, and we embrace that, and we would bring, 25 million, millions of people, our own American citizens. And by the way, if you don't, I think of this, the African and the African American experience in our country it's not, they should not bear the burden of this history. We should, as Americans, want to move past this history by making reparations, by amending. I mean, there's a very much a spiritual component to this. When in a lot of spiritual circles, it's, if you win, I win. If you win, I win. Why is it any different? We just need to do it on a national scale. Right. And so we need to raise the issue to one of national importance by holding hearings, for instance, very similar to what was done in South Africa. I mean, they just had 50 or some odd years of apartheid. No other country institutionalized and profited off the enslaved as much as the United States. Brazil came kind of close, but we have a unique history here, a very, very unique history. It's not to excuse genocide against First Nations people and what Hispanic folks face in our country, but this is a very unique situation, and we need to recognize it as such and make it an exception and consciously work to address it. And that includes a few of the things that I've mentioned. Obviously reparations can take many, many forms, but let's study it. Let's put a task force on it and let's act. We had the Kerner Commission in the 60s, and a lot of the same issues came up, but nothing for the most part was done. I mean, you have the Housing Act in 1968. So what we're talking about here is truly changing hearts and minds and policy, but enforcing it, right? So I know the Obama administration had a terrible time trying to enforce housing, fair housing, right? Because what happens is, they gave tax credits to builders to go into lower income, to build Section 8 housing. And I mean, obviously the goal is to get better education. Black parents want the same thing that white parents do. It's good, safe education for their children. But what you saw and what you continue to see is the white backlash. Not in my neighborhood. Oh, I'm for that. Oh yeah, I'm for, a rising tide lifts all boats. But when it comes to your neighborhood, it's different, and for the most part. And there was just a bill in Oregon that wanted to make sure that PPP was going into this, into small businesses, small African-American businesses. And, a white group, white-led group sued, saying that it was unconstitutional, that you can't inject race into these issues. Well, for 250 some years, we injected race into everything. And even up to 1964, it was legally okay to discriminate against African Americans. So all of a sudden we're going to say it's not okay to inject race? No, we've got a long way to go. I get fired up about it. So that's another long-winded answer.
Rightfully so, right? And I think that's the kind of energy we hope the film inspires, right? And it does, and we can see it happening. So thank you all for your great questions. And I'll say, we need a couple more hours, days, and weeks to really get through all the questions and get to the heart of this. So please consider this a beginning, a jumping off point, right? And I just shared in the chat the 15-minute version of the film along with our free PDF community action guide. So those are a couple of tools you can use after this to have a small group screening of your own And the community action guide really breaks down the film and the different ways you can use it to have an honest dialogue. So please use those resources. And as I mentioned, we're going to get to as many questions as we can, but there's so many great questions. We might not get to everything. But Frances, a couple of folks asked this, and I wanted to kind of combine these questions. Could you talk about what it means to you to be an anti-racist? And can you talk about how you might explain being an anti-racist to someone who doesn't think white privilege exists, to someone who might be a more challenging person to speak with about this?
Right. That's a great question, and one we almost get in every, because I mean, chances are if you're on the Zoom, you're a conscious person, but chances are you have someone in your family or in your world or your business that isn't. And I think the way to approach it is kind of common sense. I mean, just the issue of, for instance, what an African-American mother thinks about on a Friday night when her son goes out, to hang out with friends. Her concerns and her are very different from a white mother's, apart from other issues that a white mother might have with her child, right? And so the idea that the color of your skin hasn't afforded you advantages in our society. Again, I point to in 1957, a returning Black World War II veteran, a hero. He was decorated in fighting courageously for this country, was lynched in South Georgia. I don't know of any, I'm sure there have been a smattering of white people lynched, but I don't know a lot of white people that were lynched on the scale of 2,500 to 3,000, possibly even more, that have been lynched in our country. So it's not one of the issues, and this is why it's so difficult to get at questions like this, and to is that the white elite, and that's one of the reasons I put Ian Haney Lopez in the book, and I really encourage you to read his book, Dog Whistle Politics. There are politicians that are intentionally stirring up white antipathy against African Americans. They were doing it in the 1700s. I'm sure my family did it. It's like they were told that, and this becomes encoded almost in our family structures, right? In white family structures. No matter how low you get in our society, which is why they had the white overseer, right? No matter how, and they did have Black overseers of the enslaved, but no matter how low you get, we've had this message in our society, you will always be higher than a Black person. And I really wanted, it didn't have room in the movie, but it's like, I really wanted to connect the dots to the 1600s, which is why I talked about the creation of whiteness. You can fast forward to the election in 2020, the presidential election, and the subsequent Capitol Hill riot, right? Because essentially the people that stormed and invaded the Capitol, they feel a loss of something. So there's a lot of psychology here involved. I believe anti-Black racism is actually hardwired into our brains. I haven't done a lot of research on that, but hate can be hardwired into our brains. And so what's happened in our country is generation upon generation upon generation of not dealing with this issue has led to this kind of boil beneath the surface. And I think President Obama getting elected kind of unleashed it. And then it's festered. And until we deal with the infection, the source of the infection, I hope I see it in my lifetime, but it's going to take time.
Absolutely. And I'm sure many of you have read Ta-Nehisi Coates, but His great book, We Had 8 Years, really goes deeply into that, right? And speaking of that, speaking of politics, Francis, which is obviously such a big player here, can you speak about the voter suppression efforts underway now in the US, making similar claims because of projection that whites are to become the minority here in sometime around 2045?
Right. So again, it's this infection being leveraged on a national political level, and you'll do anything you can. It's really, the math is simple. If you can prey upon those that are impoverished. I was standing in line not a week ago with a man who he had to provide his driver's license to a clerk for something. And he said, I need this to buy I don't know what he was buying at the time. I need this to buy a golf cart, but I don't need it to vote. And I said to him, as I'm prone to do, because I like to make corrective actions right when I see them, what about the person who's so impoverished they don't have a car, or they can't get to the driver's license bureau? That's white privilege in action. We take those kind of things for granted, that we have a car, that maybe somebody will, if somebody passes away in our family, okay, you're not going to inherit $1 million, but maybe you'll get an old beat up car, or you'll maybe, the expectations for people that are so unconscious about their privilege is mind numbing. I'm like, well, what about the person who doesn't have a driver's license? What about them? I mean, so it's real clear. If you saw this, and I say Stacey Abrams for president one day, I just never thought I would live to see Georgia and even North Carolina came close, and my home state of Arizona go blue. And I don't like to inject politics in it, because I really believe in the sanctity of that and each person's vote. But when that process gets distorted, and they're actively pursuing ways to marginalize, to oppress, to take away the vote, I mean, just flat take it away. And so you go after those soft targets, right? People who maybe have a hard time registering to vote. They are homeless, or they have a hard time establishing an address, or so these are deliberate attempts to take away the vote. There's just no question about it. And so there's more and more and more of it, and I imagine we'll continue to see more and more and more of it.
Absolutely, and we'll be looking at ourselves and everyone here to do everything we can to fight that.
Yes.
And Francis, we've had a few questions about education. A couple actually came in via email before the event. Could you talk about education, how it might be changing, if the film is being used in high schools and middle schools and beyond, and where a change in education might come from?
So that's the one of the core issues, right? And again, this was something I wanted to put in the movie but couldn't, so due to time. But most of, and by the way, I didn't want to lose the Nominee Hall story. I didn't want to lose the Canada story, because what those segments represent is, if my uncle and others had chosen not to rewrite the legal code to enshrine slavery, we might have had a more fair and equitable country if we had chosen to abandon slavery. But of course, as I say in the movie, we did, and we doubled down, right? And so you have history textbooks, primarily 7th, I think, through 12, that really don't reflect. And I hope, and I think this is why my film is so important. It's like it puts in one sitting, you could almost do 10 years of terrible history that you got in junior high or high school. You can reverse it by watching my movie, right? Because so most of the textbooks come out of Texas, and Texas being Texas has really made a campaign to recast slavery. And by the way, I talk about the politicization of the country kind of moving right in my film called Heist, Who Stole the American Dream. I go back to the 70s, and I talk about why politics are the way they are today. But essentially, slavery is and I think reversing the effects of enslavement and Jim Crow is a national emergency. But what we could do, if there are parents in the audience, it's very difficult to get. I tried to get my film into junior high and high schools. It went all the way up to superintendent level, and this was 3 years ago. You have to remember our movie came out in 2017. But we were met as too controversial. And I think hopefully it would be a little bit different now. This is a more difficult thing to pin it on, but distributors. So we've done a really good job of grassroots. Nick, give yourself a hand. Nick has done amazing work distributing the film to grassroots. It's because we met that impediment in the junior high and high school level. Distributors, and we are signed with Passion River, but we can do our own thing. They don't typically, junior high and high schools typically don't have funding to license films. Now, I would give my film away if someone in the audience today came and said, hey, I've gotten my PTA behind it, and we'd like to show your film in the junior high and high school. I will give it to you for free. It's just, typically it takes hundreds, if not thousands of emails till you get someone in a high school or a junior high that's willing to go through the red tape to show our film. But I tell you, a secret weapon might be the PTA. So if you're in the audience tonight and you have taken an interest in your child's textbooks and how they're casting slavery, talk to your PTA and say, listen, we've got this great film that really, and I think it's suitable. I've asked psychologists, and I believe our film is suitable for 7th grade and up. But that's been the problem. But I see the PTA as if anybody has any connections at the national PTA level, we've tried. We would give our film to junior high and high schools. We'd give it to you free.
And, we've met some incredible parents and PTA members on these calls who are doing great work. And we've given the film to a few different high school teachers, right, who reached out and wanted to use it as a curriculum. So as Frances mentioned, this grassroots effort means so much more to us than, it's great to be streaming on Amazon Prime, but that doesn't lead to anything like this, right? And so these types of grassroots conversations are really what we're in this for. And that's why we would hope to work with more groups like that and beyond, right? And so, Frances, we've had a few questions about audience, which I thought were interesting. And, to be honest, we don't always get. Folks are wondering, how has this film been received in the African-American community? And is it just white liberals who are able to appreciate the film, the faith-based community? And maybe if you're willing, you could tie this into how this was received in your bubble, within your family, in your immediate circle.
Right. So actually, the African-American community, the people that we've reached out to, that we've done Zooms with, incredibly supportive. And I think we've gotten a few that are skeptical. We were very, very early on, very sensitive to the cultural appropriation idea. And so I really made it a point to put African-American scholars in the film. I mean, I made the film for everybody, but I really made it, for white unconscious folks who, maybe are overtly racist if there's a modicum of willingness in them, but people who maybe just didn't have a dialogue, didn't know how to open the conversation, didn't know how to talk about it. So, but by and large, the African American community has embraced the movie. We just did a big Zoom with what was the national sorority, Nick? Do you remember the ladies out of Baltimore?
Oh, yeah, I can pull it up. I'm blanking.
I'm sorry to put you on the
name
spot
right now. It's okay.
Yeah. But I tell you, the hardest group, the most difficult group was really, really strident white liberals, because they said, oh, I can't show that film. I can't talk about that film because it's a white lady benefiting off of, the African-American experience. And first off, no one is benefiting in terms of financial reward at all. I'll just say that our film is totally nonprofit. If anything, I mean, whatever licensing fees we do make, we typically turn them around to Black Lives Matters and other groups, but are in the process of running the film. But so I had the most problem from white groups that were afraid that I was doing something untoward. Whereas with the African American community, they embraced me and said, gosh, it's about time somebody got it, basically. And so the reaction in my family was difficult, honestly. It started out pretty good because they didn't really watch it. They've never quite known what I've done, but it kind of turned nasty and ugly, and that's okay, because I wouldn't change a thing. Sally and I, both since we were children, were very, very sensitive to the plight of African Americans in the South and in our world. And this was a movie that we had to make. It wasn't a choice. We had to make it. And so we did, and I wouldn't change a thing.
And speaking of making the film and what you wouldn't change, which is fortunately nothing, we had a question ask, what was the biggest thing you learned other than discovering your uncle? What was the biggest thing you learned during production and researching for this project?
I think, it's a good question. I learned many, many things. I learned to further confront my own bias, I think, probably. And, for me growing up, I was so sensitive. It was very difficult for me to process it. And obviously, as I got older, and I went to university, and I studied the apartheid movement. I think what I discovered was that I had more unconscious bias than I realized. But the film really, really helped me, and some other stuff I've read, further confront my own unconscious. I would never consciously do it. None of us would, I think. Anti-Black racism on a national scale is just counter to our values. I think that's one of the problems as a nation. I think that's one of the problems. It's so difficult for people to grasp the fact that we actually did this to our fellow citizens. I think it's so reprehensible. And so we kind of want to push it out of our mind, and we don't want to deal with it. But we are made so much less whole by not confronting it. And as we started out the Zoom, what are we so afraid of? So I think too, the resilience and the understanding, the resilience of the African American community, and and just the absolute brilliance and sheer resilience of the African American community that has been through so much. But this is an American story, and we are all responsible for it. And we, just like we care about our fellow citizens getting COVID, we should care that there hasn't been any generational wealth transfer. Every African American generation is starting from scratch. And the numbers just follow the numbers. And we should all care about that.
Absolutely. And a high, again, also high on the list of things we're all, I think, thinking about or caring about is criminal justice system.
Right.
And so, Frances, I wondered if you could talk about we had a question about the different penalties, for instance, cocaine versus crack. And we've had questions about law enforcement and police departments being akin to runaway slave hunters, given the police brutality. Can you talk a little bit about the criminal justice system and how it consciously furthers the white supremacy that we're living in?
Well, it preys on poverty. I mean, there are many, many multiple reasons, right? People commit crimes because they're impoverished, because they're desperate, they have no choice. I mean, the thing about anti-Black racism is there's not a part of our society, whether within us or outside of us, that it doesn't touch, right? But two examples: bail money, not requiring bail money way disproportionately impacts more impoverished African Americans. What happens when you go to jail? You can't make bail. There's a social impact to your family system. One of the reasons I made the movie, or was inspired to make the movie, if I could use that word, was seeing what was happening in Ferguson. And so I went to school on what was happening in Ferguson. And the Department of Justice later did a study on this and reported on this. But look at privatization of everything, right? So again, in Heist, you can see there's certain things that don't need to be privatized, right? There's a public-private partnership in a lot of areas that works. But if you look at the Ferguson court system, and I talk about this in length in my TED Talk, if you look at the Ferguson court system, that municipal court was being run by a private corporation. And so what's their goal? Make it as profitable as possible. So it got to the point where even the police admitted this, that they were rounding up a disproportionate amount of African Americans for stupid crimes, maybe spitting, or, as Mr. Garner unfortunately found out, selling one cigarette. I mean, they were rigging the system to make as many arrests as possible. And a huge disproportionate number of those arrests, very disproportionate number of those arrests, were African Americans. And so they couldn't make bail. And so, also what you have at work in, there's a wonderful, Richard Rothstein is in the film. He talks about white flight from the city of St. Louis and how the jobs followed, the whites to the suburbs. But this was, so if you look at Ferguson today, you have a direct reflection of this anti-Black racist policy. But you look at the federal government purposefully, after World War II, resegregating housing in Ferguson and in the St. Louis area, right? So I hope that's what comes across in the movie, that this was engineered. This was not some happenstance, just some flow of events that happened to catch up all these, Black folk in this policy. This was deliberate policy. And so you literally, I hope, when you go about your day tomorrow, you will think how this history has impacted folks that you meet in your day-to-day life, African Americans that you meet, because it has. There's just no question. And then not to discount the success, right? What African Americans have overcome and the success that they have achieved in our society. That is also to be applauded. But we really need to, just as much as we engineered the policy and the effects, we need to reverse that.
Absolutely. And I wanted to just take a second to thank everyone who is on this call right now. So I'm watching the participant number, and it hasn't changed more than 10 people throughout this hour. So thank you all for being here, for sticking through this conversation. It's not an easy conversation to have. And that's why we're here to answer your questions, as well as provide tools like our community action guide and the short version of our film and our full film. So again, thank you to everyone for being here throughout this. Francis, we had so we have just about 5 minutes left before we'll hand it back to Tracy. We had an anonymous question come in, and I think it's probably one that others have as well. So I was wondering if you could try to provide an answer to this. And I think a lot of folks are probably thinking this. They ask, as a white woman, I sometimes feel like I ought to apologize for our country's oppression of Black people. How would I do it? What would I say? What would be appropriate? You know, we get questions like that a lot, right? Like, what can I do? Can you address that?
Right. Yes, apologize. You know, apologize for the white supremacy that's been in our policy, but do it in a way, you know, maybe join a group, like start your own TIBA group, you know, make it more substantive, and maybe go to a group that's exploring these issues. And I was behind at Costco. I was getting, you know, gas behind young African-American woman, and she had a T-shirt on that said, essentially, I can't remember the exact wording, but it was like, we need to protect and support our African-American women. And I just said to her, I said, you know, I said, I really like your T-shirt. And I think it was after it was some incident. I'm a news junkie, so it was something that was in the news. And I said, I'm so happy that it was something that was positive that was happening. And I said, it was relating to that. And I said, you know, I mean, so it was, I'll never see the woman again, you know, but it was like, this was a white woman, you know, who was saying, I see you, right? I see you. And on some level, on a deeper level, you know, by the way I said it, I can't empathize with your pain, but I can sympathize with it, and I can support you by verbally showing my support. Obviously, there are a lot more ways to, on a deeper level, an apology would be great. I mean, you know, it's certainly on a national level, we need to push for that. You know, we need to have a national Truth and Reconciliation Commission on par with what South Africa did. Let's have a national apology, and then start to make material changes in the lives of African Americans.
Absolutely. And you mentioned, you know, more than empathy, right? And what we try to talk about is solidarity, right? And action. And so I think possibly the deeper context behind you, Francis, in line, being able to offer that compliment to that African-American woman is the work that you've done to get there, right? And maybe that didn't happen overnight. And so that's something we can encourage everyone here to do, right? As we just posted our resource list again in the chat. Pick up a book. There's no better time than the present to get started. And yes, it feels daunting to get started, but you have to start somewhere, right? And so pick up one of the books in our resources section, or watch the film if you haven't yet, or share the film. There are concrete things that you can do, and, you know, follow the film on Facebook, and that will give you the language to share with others. And I'll put our website here in the chat one more time, and there you can follow us on Facebook. You can sign up for our email list as we do more events like this and get the word out, and you can reach out to us if you run into a roadblock, if you have a question, or if you are thinking, well, I'm thinking I have a group that might want to do something like this. So we want to help you and offer tools. And we hope this can be kind of and just the beginning for all of you great people
Raise
here.
the
Go ahead.
noise. Yeah, raise the noise in your community, but like go to city, county commission meetings, city council meetings, put your voice behind, taking a lot of the tactical gear money in police departments and putting it into getting cops, walking the beats in their communities. I mean, Black families want security and safety like white families do, right? There are many, many ways to make a tangible difference.
Absolutely. So with that, I want to, of course, thank you, Francis, for this, and thank everyone here. There's so many great questions that we weren't able to get to, and there are answers for them. Feel free to reach out to us or reach out to your community for answers. And of course, another big thank you to RAIN, Racial Awareness on the North Side. Please look them up and see if you can get involved with them. To our friends at the Together is Better Alliance, that we've shared their link in the chat, to the 30 incredible libraries and library programmers who made this happen, who found room in their schedules and budgets to make this happen, to support the film, really. And what that does is give us more legs to do more work just like this. And of course, last but not least, big thanks to Tracy Gossage at Northbrook Library, who really spearheaded this entire conversation and streaming event. So deepest gratitude to you, Tracy. And I can hand it back to you, Tracy, if you want to have a closing. And with that, I'll sign off. Nick Kelso, producer at Francis Causey Films, and I'll throw our link in one more time. So if you'd like to reach out, please don't hesitate.
Great, thank you so much, Nick, great moderation, and Francis, thank you for all your insights. Big thank you to everybody that attended. That was incredible seeing all those Q&A questions come in, and well, I wish we could go for another hour. I know we gotta wrap it up. So just so you all know, you will be getting a link to this recording in a couple of days. When you exit out of the Zoom, there is going to be a short survey. Please, take a few moments to give us some feedback. We really appreciate it. And you can still watch the film. I dropped the link in the chat. That will be up to stream through the end of Friday if you want to see it or revisit. And that website also has the link where you can reach out to Nick and Francis if you have an additional question or a burning one that didn't get answered tonight. All right, so thank you so much, everybody, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Be safe.